On the Majority Report on the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome back to the program. He is the host of All In with Chris Hayes, author of Colony Within a Nation and The Twilight of the Elite, two books that you should absolutely read. Chris Hayes. Chris, welcome back to the program.
Sam, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing okay. As you can hear, my voice is a little bit tried this morning.
Voice a little shot, huh?
Yeah, it is a little bit. And I just want to say, you don't get enough credit for this, but Twilight of the Elite saw what was coming down the pike quite a ways. People should go back and read that book.
It's funny. I go back to that book. There are some things I definitely got wrong in that book, but the stuff that I got right, I got really right. Like there's a chapter in there basically about like knowledge and disinformation, and it's about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and how we form our knowledge. And I spent a lot of time actually in that chapter on the ClimateGate fiasco, which was these hacked emails of a obscure climate research center in the UK that then became like this like completely manufactured scandal that they were like cooking the books. It resulted in a whole bunch of investigations. The Murdoch machine on both sides of the Atlantic went into, and it's completely a playbook for the kinds of disinformation campaigns we've seen since then.
Yeah. And that was WikiLeaks too, wasn't it?
What's that?
That was WikiLeaks as well.
It was weird. We never actually found out who the hackers are, although the sort of circumstantial evidence points to Russia. But they posted, whoever hacked it posted their own thing, a la Guccifer. So it was a very similar situation because the Russia hacks first appear through a Guccifer site that's kind of clunky and bad, and then WikiLeaks ends up posting it as well, and they're much more easily accessible.
Right. Interesting. That a lot of that has been lost to recent history, I guess. But that was people forget that dominated the news for like 3 years.
It really did.
It was nuts.
And it also put a bunch of climate scientists through the ringer.
Michael Mann.
There's cost to that stuff when you get a target painted on your back.
All right. Well, so today we don't know for sure, but it certainly appears based upon what Lamar Alexander said last night, or a statement he released, that we're not going to hear witnesses. I want to get into the politics about it in a first, but let's first hear this quote from Alan Dershowitz, because this is the one that, I think this is just sort of stunning. And, Tim Worster. Was it? No, it's it's not Super Worster. It's the
Tim Wu.
Right. I know. He said that he took Dershowitz's class at Harvard, and he said that there is something to the effect of there is the most ethical thing to do as a defense attorney is to throw out. Just to not recognize any ethics in the pursuit of the defense of your
just do whatever right up to the line.
And I think that's what this is an example of, except for he's playing with the entire future of the country in some ways with this. Here's Alan Dershowitz.
Yesterday, I had the privilege of attending the rolling out of a peace plan by the President of the United States regarding the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I offered you a hypothetical the other day. What if a Democratic president were to be elected and Congress were to authorize much money to either Israel or the Palestinians, and the Democratic president were to say to Israel, no, I'm going to withhold this money unless you stop all settlement growth, or to the Palestinians, I will withhold the money Congress authorized to you unless you stop paying terrorists. And the president said, quid pro quo. If you don't do it, you don't get the money. If you do it, you get the money. There's no one in this chamber that would regard that as in any way unlawful. The only thing that would make a quid pro quo unlawful is if the quo were in some way illegal. Now,
pause it for 1 second. All right. Now, let's just stop it here because, A, in this scenario, right, the president wouldn't be doing it in secret. Right. And B, it's not a question of the quo being illegal. The act of doing a quid pro quo and withholding money itself is unlawful We know that at this point, and that's
the thing that I was screaming at the television while I was watching it. Is that, and I've been saying this all along. Take away there are sort of three components. There's the trying to get them to interfere in the elections, even if there wasn't a quid pro quo itself is I think impeachable. Then there's upholding the money, which itself is unlawful, and then there's exchanging the two for each other. So yes, can you imagine actually, like, think about this for a second. It would be, I don't know if it would result in impeachment, but if aid was passed by both houses and signed by the president, and then a Democratic president unilaterally upheld aid to Israel, you think that wouldn't be a big deal?
And
like, what are you talking about?
We're not even acknowledging the fact that Trump did this in secret. We have every single agency that's involved in this process signing off and wondering what the hell's going on. If Barack Obama had held back aid in secret for Israel, or for like that, they wouldn't get this far. They would somehow figure out a way of impeaching him before it even got to the Senate. I mean, they would convict him. It would have been nuts. But let's continue here, because this is the sleight of hand. He's saying when the quo is illegal. But go ahead.
Were in some way illegal. Now, we talked about motive. There are three possible motives that a political figure can have. One, a motive in the public interest, and the Israel argument would be in the public interest.
Pause it for 1 second. Now, this is also a sleight of hand here, too, with the idea of in the public interest. They're not giving... This is policy. This is stated statutory policy, right? Like laws were passed. That's how the money gets there. This is not just a vague notion of what is in the public interest. This is something very specific.
Also, he could have, this is the thing I always say, he could have vetoed the bill. He signed the bill. Like, that's the thing that drives you so crazy when they say, well, the president has discretion, the president policy this and policy that. Like, he signed the bill. Right? Like, yes, the way the president can say is like, I am vetoing he's done this on Saudi Arabia 3 times. He's vetoed things passed by both houses of Congress to protect Mohammed bin Salman's campaign to basically grind Yemenis into dust and kill hundreds of thousands of them. He can do that. He can veto, he can veto bills. But the point of this is that he freaking signed the bill, so it was the law.
Continue.
The second is in his own political interest, and the third, which hasn't been mentioned, would be in his own financial interest, his own pure financial interest, just putting money in the bank. I want to focus on the second one for just one moment. Every public official that I know believes that his election is in the public interest. And mostly you're right. Your election is in the public interest.
Pause it. Now, wait a second. So now it has gone from law that is passed, signed by the president, as you say, has turned into public interest. And then he defines public interest as just sort of like something that happens relative to the public. Like not even to the public's benefit, but rather just like they're interested in it. Like, go back here. He's slid. It's amazing how much he's slid these definitions over the course of just seconds.
Yes.
Putting money in the bank. I want to focus on the second one for just one moment. Every public official that I know believes that his election is in the public interest. And mostly you're right. Your election is in the public interest. And if a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, that cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment.
Well, he's done so many sleight of hands that by the end of it, he's gotten to a place that's manifestly absurd, right? Because what he has done is, through this sort of slippery transmutation of his definitions, he has ended up in a place where definitionally a politician views their reelection in the national interest, and the ergo definitionally pursuing said reelection can never be a corrupt intent. Obviously that's ridiculous.
Well,
obviously.
But it also means that the only way a president can do something that is worthy of impeachment is presumably if he is in his second term, right? When he can't get reelected. Like there's a story today about Senate investigators interviewing IRS whistleblower because allegedly a Treasury official came in and interfered with the audit of Trump and Pence. But how could one not argue that Trump interfering with that wouldn't be in the public interest?
Right. Exactly.
I mean,
exactly. And I mean, people have also used the Watergate example, right? Like, look, if you think that, it is in the national interest for McGovern to lose, right? I mean, and clearly Nixon did. I mean, Nixon thought it would be bad for the country if McGovern won. And then you have a bunch of burglars go bug the offices of the DNC. Like, you're doing that for, I guess, the national interest under Dershowitz's conception.
I think basically everything is okay in that instance. But also, if you're just talking about the public interest, not only do politicians think that it's in the public interest that they get reelected, but it's also, I would imagine most politicians think it's in the public interest that the public loves them and doesn't think that they've done anything wrong. Right. So like every cover up would also be perfectly legal because it would hurt the nation if people knew. I mean, under these terms, why wouldn't you exonerate Bill Clinton? Because of course it was in the public's interest that they didn't know the
for them not
details.
To know about what happened, because that would damage the Democratic Party. That he thinks it's in the national interest to keep its hand on government.
Well, just everything that we were told about, what are we going to tell the kids? Which we heard over and over again, and we would,
God.
I mean, that was the big rallying cry of the Republicans at the time. So that is, and the thing that's really horrific about that is not only does this is going to set a precedent, right? I mean, this goes down in history as the reason because Lamar Alexander basically said that there's no need for more evidence to prove something that has already been proven, but that does not meet the United States Constitution for a high bar for an impeachable offense. He's using this argument by Dershowitz.
Yes, I mean, I think he's using a version of it. I'm not sure. Like, I think that it's funny. I had a different reaction to the Alexander statement than a lot of people, which is that I guess I never expected him to break, but I actually weirdly found it satisfying that he at least stipulates, like, I found the gaslighting infuriating and insane, that for hours of people going up there trying to tell us that, like, Trump cares about corruption or that this wasn't done for his reelection, when, like, it's just so, I mean, obviously it is. Like, stop talking to us like we're idiots. Stop trying to say that, like, day is night and night is day. At least Alexander basically stipulates that, right? At least Alexander says, yeah, they proved their case. And it's like, I felt some weird relief that, like, thank you for not, like, it's the crazy pills feeling that you have watching these people lying and utter bad faith about, well, the president's really concerned about corruption and, well, he wanted a burden sharing. I mean, give me a fucking break. Like, so at least Alexander, the more, in some ways it's like more defensible to me in a weird way to be like, this was wrong and inappropriate, but not worthy of removal, and he did the thing that he's accused of.
Here is the part where I think Alexander does his sleight of hand. This is paragraph 3. This is paragraph 3. It was, quote, this is a quote, "It was inappropriate for the president to ask a foreign leader to investigate his political opponent and to withhold United States aid to encourage that investigation." Like you say, he is admitting the facts there. And then he goes on to say, "When elected officials inappropriately interfere with such investigations, it undermines the principle of equal justice under the law." And then he goes on to say, "But the Constitution does not give the Senate power to remove the president from office and ban him from this year's ballot simply for actions that are inappropriate." The issue is not that he interfered with an investigation. There was no investigation.
Right.
And in fact, the evidence suggests that he didn't even want an investigation. He just wanted an announcement about the investigation.
He wanted an interview on Fareed Zakaria.
Well, this is where Lamar Alexander lies and does his own.
Oh, no, I'm not. Yes, I totally agree with that. I'm not taking Alexander off the hook.
Right.
I'm just like, the one silver lining was at least you're not like, pissing on me and telling me it's raining. Like,
well, but wait a second. No, he's saying I'm pissing on you, but it's also raining.
No, that's true.
But it's also raining.
That's
what he's saying here.
That's right. That's what he's saying. I'm pissing on you and it's also raining.
Right. You can't feel the pee because it's raining too.
Right, that's right. You can't tell where the wetness is coming from.
He's just changing the gaslight here because he's just saying, here are the facts. He's saying, I agree, it is 2 + 2, and that definitely equals 5. And that's where he's getting off. This is not about interfering with investigation. This is about interfering with an election.
That's right, and that becomes the issue. I mean, it's been the issue from the beginning. The broader context of this, as someone who covered this day in, day out throughout all of 2019, and often talked with you about it. The Democrats did not want to impeach Donald Trump. They didn't want to do it. Nancy Pelosi didn't want to do it. Hakeem Jeffries didn't want to do it. I think Nadler probably did and was sort of being, they were putting the reins, but Schiff certainly didn't. The thing that made them break the glass and pull the emergency brake was, holy shit, he's going to rig the next election. And so that's the thing at the center of this entire thing, and the reason that an election isn't a remedy is that the fear is that it won't be a free and fair election.
That's right.
That's the problem. The mechanism at the center, the reason that this rose to the level of impeachable from Democrats, and who did not want to do this, was a realization of holy shit, he is going to use the presidency to rig the next election, and so being look, we got an election in 8 months or whatever it is. It's yeah, we got an election in 8 months. That, I don't know, Mohammed bin Salman is going to be sending his hackers to bring down the Democratic nominee. Awesome.
Well, and this is the thing is that I first of all, I mean, if it was up to Giuliani, I think at this point, Giuliani has exposed himself as a raving lunatic, and to a certain extent, I think the Democrats have to some extent inoculated themselves. Or inoculated if Joe Biden, and I think everybody's clear that I don't want Joe Biden to be the nominee, but if Joe Biden's the nominee, there is at least some inoculation to they're going to continue to pursue this. I mean, they're going to just figure out another way of claiming that there's new evidence, about Joe Biden. But they've really done their work in terms of laying down the narrative. The other thing that occurs to me, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, from a political standpoint, let's just turn to that, because assuming that Mitch McConnell is able to wrangle the votes to end this today, Donald Trump will be able to do his Super Bowl interview and do the State of the Union address and tout how he was completely exonerated by the Senate. And Dershowitz did a great job, and he's going to pre-pardon him for all his massages or whatever it is. What do you think the political implications are of this going forward?
So the sort of annoyingly boring answer is that I think it's probably mostly a stalemate, which is to say, it's not really determinative in either direction. That said, I think the witness vote is harder than the acquittal vote, and I think that I was talking to someone the other day about Schumer, we were talking about Schumer holding the caucus, right? Together, and Schumer's definitely going to hold everyone on the witness vote. There's no question with Jones, Sinema, Manchin, right, who are probably the three most likely to bolt. Doug Jones in Alabama, Joe Manchin in West Virginia, and Kristen Sinema in Arizona. That's an easy vote for them. The witness vote is an easy vote. We should hear more people. Right. And the converse is that it's not a great vote for Cory Gardner, and I think that there's a reason that Susan Collins, who's got enough sort of independence from Trump in terms of her political base, is probably going to vote for witnesses and then go back to Maine and be like, look at me, I'm independent. So I think the witness vote is a bad vote for them, and I think that the acquittal vote probably doesn't. The acquittal vote after that doesn't help, and particularly we don't want witnesses, we're acquitting him, and then Bolton 3-4 weeks later is on television being like, yes, he did exactly what he's accused of. I think that's a pretty bad political situation for Trump. I also think there's a motivating factor here. I do think there's something about just watching people and talking to people. I was talking to people on the subway on my ride in. That's happened sometimes. The sort of feeling of impotent rage coming right as the campaign season starts. I don't think it's the worst thing for people to be reminded of the stakes here. Right. In the broad anti-Trump coalition, which is a very broad coalition and very unwieldy because it includes people from Bill Kristol to Marxist-Leninists. So I think that the reminder of the sort of fundamental stakes here going literally right into election season is also not the worst thing. And the last thing I'll say is, this entire thing, the thing that it reminds me most of is Kavanaugh, right? Where it's like at a certain level, the conclusions seem foreordained, and then there's these developments that make it seem like, oh, maybe there's some little crack, and then the foreordained conclusion ends up happening, right? And I don't like Kavanaugh, though. The difference in Kavanaugh is Kavanaugh really rallied a certain segment of people on the right who aren't crazy about Trump, but who really were like ride or die for Kavanaugh. And I don't think impeachment has done the same. I think impeachment has really activated the Trump people, but I don't think it's had that broader rallying effect. And it's also like 8 months before the election. So I feel like in the balance of motivation, particularly once impeachment ends, I think a sort of mantle of like righteous rage passes to people who feel wronged by the decision that is not like the worst thing in the universe. Again, I'm looking for silver linings here because I think it's genuinely like dangerous and perilous where we are. I want to be very clear on that. But purely on the politics, I don't think that like it's terrible politics, terribly politically for the sort of anti-Trump coalition.
No, I think, and I would add to that, just broadly speaking, had the Democrats not impeached, I'm convinced it would have demoralized a huge segment of, maybe not huge, but a significant segment of Democratic voters.
Yes, agreed.
Because, we're going to go into this, like, in terms of like Trump, we're going into this election where he's going to try and suppress votes. And if you start with the narrative of Democrats are just not going to fight in any way, I think then it gives him a leg up.
And I felt the same way about Kavanaugh. Like I felt the way about Kavanaugh, which is that like you got to fight. You got like you don't have the numbers, you don't have the votes, but you fight and you fight and you fight and you fight. You do what you think is right, and you make the case, and you push as far as you can. And then if you lose, you lose, but you got to lose fighting. And like that. And if you don't fight, if you just roll over, that says to people that are trying to vote, like people understand the math of the votes, right? Like people get that. Like we've never removed a president through an impeachment vote. In fact, as I pointed out earlier today, no U.S. senator has ever voted to remove a president of their own party in American history, right? So like the math here was always clear, but that doesn't mean you don't fight. You got to fight.
It used to be during like the Bush years, that was the rallying cry of the activist base was there are fights that are worth losing. That it's okay to lose these fights because not only what you get out of it, but just the exercise itself. I contend that, and let's play this Martha McSally ad, because this is when they don't vote for the witnesses. Like this is one of those few times in my mind where process is going to make a difference, because there are a bunch of like purple state, if you will, Republican senators who are on the cusp. And this is going to cut in to those folks who want to see some independence from Trump and want to see just that process is done properly. Those people generally I cannot stand, but in this instance, it might be valuable. Here is one of those ads from the Never Trumper organization who, people will have to sort of suck up the praise for John McCain and Barry Goldwater in this. Yeah. But again,
well, they know who their audience is.
That's exactly.
It's not the dumbest. It's relatively smart for the audience it's targeted at.
From my perspective, this is the only constituency that these Never Trumpers ever had in the first place is Republicans, not Democrats. But here,
yes, correct.
Martha McSally, Arizona rejected you in 2018. And you know why. You were too close to Donald Trump. And you lost badly. Now you've gone full Trump. Again.
Man, you're a liberal hack. I'm not talking to you.
You knew Arizona wanted the truth. We demanded witnesses and evidence in the trial of Donald Trump. No, there's a reason your poll numbers are dropping fast. And you're on your way to defeat. Oh, that's right, Martha. Again. Arizona has always produced mavericks, true independents. People like John McCain and Barry Goldwater, senators that served Arizona, people of courage, toughness. They stood for what was right, no matter the political risk. And they are remembered as American heroes. And you, Martha, you'll be remembered as just another Trump hack. If you're remembered at all.
That ad, I mean...
I like the ad. I just wish that the voiceover had a little more contempt in it.
Yeah.
You know, like I just feel like if I was giving the notes in that read, I would have been like, just ramp it up. You're only at a 7 now. I need it at a 15.
It's like Elizabeth Taylor and a cat on a hot tin roof. I mean, it's really sort of like just it's literally like you imagine like some suburban Republican voter who's sitting there like 3 drinks into martinis, and just Martha McSally walks in and is like, oh, look who showed up. But they did another ad like this for Cory Gardner, which had the same sort of like, which was the same mirror thing. Like, you're a wimp, you know, you're Donald Trump's like, bitch or something. Like, I don't even know if it said that, but it certainly felt like that's what it said. And I think that's going to resonate with this very, very narrow band of would-be Republican voters.
Yeah, I think, yes, I do think that's right. I mean, I think, I tend to think process is not what is going to kill you. And I also think that they're not, I think they're stuck in a tough place, McSally and Gardner particularly, politically, not like, in any larger sense. But, they can't, I think voting for witnesses is like voting to like get more information that will make voting for acquittal harder, right? So, which like, I think they have to vote for acquittal, and I think they're probably right, because you got to take your shot if you're McSally and Gardner going with the MAGA base, because distancing yourself from it leaves you stuck between first and second base, right?
Right.
Like, you got to either like be like this independent maverick or full Trump, and they don't really have the guts or the base or the ability to go full maverick. So I don't think they're necessarily making the wrong call in politically, again, narrowly politically, in voting against witnesses. However, there is a cost to pay for that, and Democrats should deliver that cost, right? Like, and I thought that, the Goldwater-McCain stuff's fascinating, right? Because Goldwater is famously the person that leads the delegation of Republican senators to the White House to inform Richard Nixon that he's going to lose a removal vote in the Senate for the first time in American history, which prompts his resignation. And it was a big deal. Obviously, Goldwater is a pillar of the Republican Party and a stalwart conservative. And John McCain, very famously, like, at 2 a.m, gives the thumbs down to the ACA repeal vote, killing the top domestic legislative priority for Trump. And, those 2 moments did involve some independence and courage, whatever you think about the 2 men otherwise.
Right.
It genuinely did. And it genuinely is a thing that a certain kind of voter in an identity sense wants to associate with himself, right? Like fair-minded, like not like a hack and not like partisan and in the center, but like mavericky. Like that has an appeal to a certain kind of voter, particularly in that state, that particularly Martha McSally has to win. And so I think this absolutely hurts her.
I've met a lot of people like that over the years. They're usually men. They're usually sort of like libertarian leaning. They listen to NPR to say that they listen to both sides. And they, I think it is a question of like how they want to perceive themselves. And I think that is
exactly.
And I think that is that. And I literally think there's, not a ton of these people, but if the Democrats, I'm convinced if the Democrats take the Senate, it is going to be because of these votes is going to be like one of the sort of last straw on the camel's back for these senators.
And we should be, one thing I think is really important when you think about the politics of this year and this moment is that there's lots of different sub-constituencies that Democrats need to do better with at the margins, right? In different places geographically. Like I saw this fascinating map yesterday that was where people who made between, I want to say it was like $20,000 and $40,000 or $40,000 and $60,000. It was a map of the states, right? And of 2016 of whether Trump or Clinton won. And there's this huge range depending on the state, right? Because there's these different, like, it's not one electorate. It's just a million different electorates. So, like, what message works against Cory Gardner in Colorado Springs or what works against Martha McSally in the Tucson suburbs is different than what might work in Kenosha, Wisconsin, right? Yeah. Like, in fact, I think is almost certainly, and different than what works in Detroit or in Philadelphia. Like, all you need to do better among all these different segments, both in turnout and in persuasion, and they're different groups with different things they care about. So, like, it just, the key for Democrats, and particularly when you think about both the sort of national electoral college math and the state-by-state map, and then the frontline House districts, is that there's just lots of different constituencies. I think there's some, swing voters or voters that you need to win in Wisconsin who could give a shit about impeachment.
Oh,
right?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. That's why this is.
But then there's some voters in the Tucson suburbs, right, who live in Scottsdale that are exactly the kind you described. So, like, you just, this is not rocket science, but, like, reaching these different constituencies, particularly when you're talking about a coalition that is so much more diverse on one side than the other side, right? that's the difficult task the Democrats have before them.
I agree, but I think the thing is that there is nobody running for Senate who's got to reach those people in Wisconsin and in Kenosha.
Correct,
and
exactly.
Tucson.
Yeah,
that's why I think
Yep.
This impeachment story has always been about the Senate races. I don't think the implications. I mean, I think that the absence of impeachment would have caused a lot of problems because all this crap about Biden. This would have gone on, and that if they decide by April or May that it's going to be Bernie or Warren or Buttigieg, all of a sudden we're going to hear about the Ukrainians getting involved in that too. I mean, there's no reason to believe that they didn't have, like, we're just gonna do this horribly corrupt thing to ensure our sense against Biden. But if it's any other Democrat, we're going to definitely play by the rules. Like that, that calculus, I don't think was happening anywhere.
Nope.
And
nope.
So I think there was a cost to pay to not impeach, as well as with Democratic enthusiasm. But to the extent that there's any gains, I think it's going to be exclusively in terms of the Senate. Well, arguably, maybe the House in certain areas, but more the Senate, because I think this stuff is basically shook out in the House. I don't think there's really any room to pick anything up in too many spaces.
I totally agree. I think that's exactly right. When you look at the map, there are a few places where there's probably 4 or 5 like real good frontline targets, but then there's a bunch they got to defend too. I mean, some of those districts, Kendra Horn's district in Oklahoma, that's like a plus 11 Trump district.
Yeah.
Plus 15, like that's a tough defend. Like they won some seats that were really at the sort of reaches in 2018. So yeah, I think the House is I don't see the House moving a ton in either direction. The Senate obviously is a big, and that's also where these key votes go. And I don't think, again, in the sort of sum total all of this, like making them take all those tough votes, Joni Ernst, Susan Collins, Cory Gardner, Martha McSally, Tom Tillis, all 5 of those people are up.
Loeffler too is it Loeffler in Georgia, the newly appointed senator. I mean, she had to tack far to the right because of Collins jumping into the race, and she was appointed specifically because she wasn't Collins, and she's going to have to turn into him to get through this jungle primary, I think.
Yep. And oh, by the way, I am so fascinated with that race because we know that Trump wanted Collins.
Yep.
Collins has been his, we call him, he's one of the basement boys. That's like the Doug Collins, Matt Gaetz, Jim Jordan, who are always doing the press huddles in the basement outside the House Intel room.
Yeah.
And he's a basement boy, and Trump loves him some basement boys, and so he wanted Collins. He was sort of prevailed upon by Mitch McConnell and others to not back Collins, and then Collins was like, screw it. So he's going to primary him, and they're going to desperately try to keep Trump out of it. But it's going to be Roy Moore, Luther Strange all over again, which is the president endorsed Luther Strange in that Alabama primary, but the MAGA heads knew who the MAGA candidate was.
Yep.
Like, they understood that Roy Moore was the MAGA guy. Like, they're not idiots. Trump could go there and, record his sort of hostage video endorsements for Luther Strange, but no one was fooled there, and it's going to be the same thing in Georgia. He could go and say Kelly Loeffler is strong on Second Amendment, loves our vets, tough on crime, whatever his, like, hilarious control paste endorsement is for everyone. And, like, every Georgia Republican knows that Doug Collins is, like, the real MAGA candidate.
Yep. All right, I got two more quick questions. I know you got to jump, but one, do you think the Democrats continue on with investigations after impeachment?
I think they have to. I mean, I really do. I think there's litigation they have to do. There's going to be, we haven't even discussed the fact that, like, the tax return Cy Vance case is going to be decided by the Supreme Court in the election year.
Right.
Like, that is a big moment in either direction, right? If the court orders him to release it, that's huge. And, you can't appeal a Supreme Court decision. I mean, there's some way I can imagine John Roberts craftily trying to, like, come up with something that allows it to be kicked, the can to be kicked past November. Like, well, we reran this back to the district court for just consideration in X, Y, and Z. Or maybe he ignores the Supreme Court, or the 5-4 Republican appointees vote to cover up the president's tax returns, which itself I think is, like, energizing, if outrageous. So there are a whole bunch, like, there's that fight coming up. There's the McGahn litigation. There is the Bolton book is going to come out. That's the other thing. Like, how could you not investigate? How can you not subpoena Bolton in the House?
Right.
After all this, how can you not subpoena Bolton in the House? Trump has essentially waived executive privilege by talking about the conversation. The guy has said he will respond to a subpoena from the Senate. You don't get to decide which house you go to.
That's
like,
right.
You can't choose. He can try, he can fight it, but, like, of course you got to keep investigating.
All right, and then lastly, there was Tim Alberta, who is is it right for Politico? Is it? He had a tweet about a thought on Lamar Alexander, and this was last night before Alexander's announcement. And he basically said that he spent a lot of time with retired and retiring congressional Republicans since 2016. Most feel a zero sense of liberation to bash Trump on the way out. Yep. If anything, they're more cowed and cautious, fearing that being out of favor with president and his party limits their earning power. That's I think, and he says it's not just about money. It's about, like, all his friends, and they worry about harassment of their families and loss of their standing in their community and its strange relationships.
Harassment of their family. Like, honestly, like, people are going to spit on you at the golf club.
And, like, I think that's why, like, Cory Gardner and in particular, I think for him, it wasn't just a question of, like, I think he could have made a calculation. I can win without them on some level, but I think he just realized, like, the cost of losing that way is far greater than the cost of losing, going down in flames with Trump. And I think they all made that calculation.
He'll go work downtown on K Street, and he'll make $1 million a year.
Yep, I think,
and he's young, right? So, like, he's thinking about he's thinking of the future now. Yeah, but I even thought that the thing about harassment of their family, like, I think the material, like, the money matters a lot, but I think we tend to underestimate, like, how much that personal stuff matters. Like, I remember having dinner with a bunch of congressional Democrats in 2010 during the Tea Party town halls, and they were just freaked out. They were shook, like, almost like physically shook, that there were people screaming at them in their faces, and it was in their heads. Like, it's not people, like, that gets in people's heads. That those interpersonal aspects of the job and of pressure and of social sanction matter a lot to the human beings that end up being elected representatives.
Yeah, I think, like, it's sometimes hard, I think, for normal people to sort of, like, realize that dynamic. And I don't mean it because, like, we're, I think there's, like, a sensitivity that exists there, or that they're living in such a bubble that the idea of criticism that comes directly to their face is so inconsistent with their experience, their life experience at this point, that it's hard to, like Tom Steyer. Like how many times do you think Tom Steyer in the past 10 years that people have come up to him and said, like, you're a jerk and you're wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Like nobody ever says that to a billionaire.
No,
because you're just
never.
like, I have an outside chance of like him dropping $500,000 on me just for the heck of it. And
exactly.
And I'm just
Michael Bloomberg basically ran New York for 12 years by buying off anyone that would say anything mean about him.
Yep. And I remember that moment where those wealthy people at during the Zuccotti Park takeover called what's his face, the business writer on CNBC. I can't. Yeah, Sorkin. And said, would you go down there and check it out and see if I'm in danger, like personal danger? And he went down there to see and had to tell them all, assure them all that you're going to be safe. Nobody's coming for you. No one's coming with pitchforks.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Chris Hayes. Thanks so much for taking the time, man. I know that things are a little bit hectic over there.
Yeah, great to talk, man.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.